Live streaming is on.
Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is Feb 18, 2022. We want to thank Clinton Ignatoff and Concerned Medicine for hosting us. Thank you, Clinton. I hope you join us later. And it's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Richard Tuohy. Where are you calling in from, Richard?
Well, I'm in Daylesford, which is in country Victoria. Australia's like this. Victoria's down the bottom here, and we're just northwest of Melbourne. And that's what we live.
I love when people carry their maps on their hand. I'm from Michigan. Wait, yeah, this way. And
Right.
you can just say we're the mittens, so you can tell.
Yeah, I see.
So we'll get into film and all that. Let's start off with this. What's the best thing for a human being?
Gee, that's a big question. What's the best thing for a human being? Personally, I think happiness.
Oh,
is the
great.
answer.
That's great, because we're gonna get into that in a second. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Favorite? I mean, that's a big question too. I guess it depends on what kind of information. And the most important information I'd like to get through a book, right? The information that shapes my being the most has been, I think it's been books, literature, but that might be incorrect. It might be the most forming and shaping information has come through interpersonal interaction. Actually, in terms of information, I would say we get a tremendous amount, and it's very formative of the kind of person that you are.
I like that. We call that direct experience. But just on reading for a second, did you grow up a reader because your parents told you to, as an example, or on your own?
Entirely on my own. My parents were very much encouraging me to read, and I was obstinate. I didn't want to. I didn't read until I left school, and I dropped out of school actually, and then got into a film scene, and people were talking books, and I wanted to know about that. I wanted to know about philosophy in particular. So that's how I entered books, and it was entirely on my own. And then I got into philosophy and went into academia and what have you. So it wasn't from a family experience.
Yeah. But just to clarify, you dropped out of school, meaning high school, or you dropped out of college?
I dropped out of high school. I didn't complete high school. Yeah.
And then on to information. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
I think as organisms, we do what all other organisms do, and that is engage with the process of evolution, trying to become something where we're not yet. And we engage with information because we have, what we're calling information, we engage with it because we have the faculties for it. We've evolved those faculties, but we're continuing to evolve those faculties. It's that hunger to evolve those faculties that is why we engage with information.
I like your choice of words, Richard. It's really good. And you sort of answered it, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
Yeah, it depends what we're talking about, but I definitely think it's innate. It's something that's come out of our being in the world, like the kind of thing that we've turned into. We can't resist it.
Yeah. Yeah, and you put all the questions into the context you want. So you're doing fine. The next
Good.
question is, do thoughts create emotions?
Yes, they do, definitely. In fact, I was dwelling on this morning, just in terms of correcting my own emotional state. I have a tremendous amount on at the moment, and it can lead me into depression, but I can choose not to. If depression is an emotional state, that's an example of being able to intellectually correct emotional states.
Beautiful. I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank.
Engage with the topic.
Very
Sit down.
good.
Yeah.
I like the word engage. So, can humans think without language?
Fascinating. You know, when I was studying philosophy, I was steadfastly in the camp of no, thought is linguistic. And assuming by language we mean this stuff that we can spit out of our mouths, I think it's incorrect now. I think we can think. I think we do think without language. We can't do complex abstract thought. Like, for instance, if you didn't have the whole apparatus of mathematics, you couldn't do calculus, right? But I think there are things you can do of a mathematical nature without having those tools. So yes, I think I don't want to say that creatures without language can't think. I want to include non-linguistic mental activity as thought.
Yeah. It's good. See, you're understanding. You can put these all into the context you want. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. It's like it's your hunch and your guess and your impulse. So this is super. Chomsky actually says language is not just words. It's culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language breaks down? When language doesn't work, what do you do?
Yeah, that's a good question, because that occurs a lot, especially when you know there's a word for something but you can't grasp it, you can't spit it out, and so you wallow you flounder in a poverty of articulation. So that would certainly reinforce the idea that words are pivotal to sophisticated thought. Yeah, I mean, although on the other hand, I do want to say that when you're floundering around trying to remember or invent a word that does or should exist, but you can't find it, you still know what it means. I want to say that first. I that's probably what I think, that you know the kind of shape of this thing, you know the boundaries of this concept, but you just can't put it into language yet. Perhaps just because of you've forgotten, or perhaps you are remembering you were thinking you remember that there's a word for it, but there actually isn't. Something along those lines. But I certainly, back to the Chomsky quote, I certainly think culture is an under-emphasized part of language. I think that what we mean by the words we use is very much out there amongst the people we're using those words with, more than they are in here. And we need to acknowledge that we're not the reasonable creatures we think we are. We are these beasts roaming around making sophisticated grunting sounds, right? In a way that helps us get along with our fellow people, like it helps us achieve the goals that we want to do. We think we have an articulate understanding of what we're doing, and we think we're reasonable. But I think reasonableness is more than subjective. It's almost fiction. I think reason has been I think reason has been overstated. The claims of reason are much greater than the ones that we humans can actually live up to.
Very good. It evoked two T.S. Eliot quotes. He says, poetry can communicate before it's understood. And he said, when I talk to you, I've got to use words, which isn't true. You can use gesture and you can use grunting. But in essence, we think we have to use words because we invented them.
Yes.
Like we're not going to do this 90-minute interview with just gesture and eye contact. And, we could hold up pieces of paper with scribblings on. We've decided that spoken word will do it. But one last thing in reaction to your statement, which was well put, you communicated it well to me, is words evoke more than their meaning.
Yeah.
They can evoke more than their meaning.
Yes, and we're not in charge of what they evoke too, because when you're talking about an evocation, you're talking about something that happens. Like if I say a word, we're talking about what happens in you, what it evokes for you. And that's, effectively, that's, I can only guess. And I do guess, and mostly we guess adequately. But, this thing about words communicating, you're suggesting that we're choosing words now. But we're not just choosing words, and we're not even just choosing facial gestures and what have you. We're also choosing intonation, right? Intonation is really important, and a lot of attention is it's become clear that the importance of intonation in communication nowadays, in particular, because we do so much communication with our fingers and keyboards, right? Where you don't get intonation. So we consciously, try to think how, or at least if we're doing it well, we think, how will these words be read? I have to be more careful than I would when I'm using my voice, because with my voice, I've got these other cues. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, totally. Because someone said I was yelling at them because I put all caps.
Absolutely.
I wasn't. The cap button was on. And last week I got an email, and the guy wrote a sentence in caps, and then he put in parentheses, excuse the caps, because I figured, he meant he left the cap button on and he didn't want to go back and correct it.
Retype it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, hey, that's all right,
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it is, the intonation is totally that. There's a great McLuhan line. He goes, shut up, he said.
Yeah, right. He's mentioning it rather than using it.
Yeah. He said, shut up. So your observations of humans, I know it's both and it depends, but are humans more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
Yeah, I feel a little bit disappointed in myself in saying that we're more feeling beings, and language comes later. Language is a way of dealing with those feelings as best language can. But first and foremost, I think we, naturally, just in terms of our own, growing up, we start off just with feelings without language. Sorry, was your question language or thinking?
No, I said, are humans more feeling beings or thinking? It's
thinking.
more, thinking. Yeah, it's back to the thinking thing. It's like,
I still think there's a primacy of feeling, and much of our thought is guided by our, for want of a better word, our emotional state or our emotional impulses or whatever these things are that come from our stomach. I think the bacteria are in charge. They create drives in us to do certain things, and then thinking comes later as a way of working with that. Yeah.
Well done. 2 Alan Turing questions from 1950. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Well, entirely depends on the stipulative characterization of the word soul. But if you mean a secondary, like if you're talking dualism here, no, thinking is not a function of the soul. But if you're talking the way one might think of someone being in good spirits or bad spirits, I'm using the word spirit there as a substitute for soul, then yeah, thinking is definitely driven by our psychological state. But it's not driven by our non-material being. I'm going to put my phone on silent. Sorry, I haven't done that.
That was good. Turing's second question is, can machines think?
And once again, it depends on the characterization of the word machine. I would say that we are a kind of machine, and I would say that we think. So, yes, will machines that we manufacture with our hands think? I think that's more in line with the kind of question that he was asking, and that's harder to predict. I would suggest, however, that crikey, I wasn't expecting questions like this. Yeah, I would suggest that I want to put an emotional state. Like we've been talking about emotions and thinking and the relation between the two, and I want to stress the primacy of that, the primacy of this emotional nature of our being, and that thinking is kind of parasitic on that, right? And I don't think it's likely that we will create machines that are able to have emotional state, and therefore the thinking that they do is not the kind of thinking that we do. Their thinking is going to be of a much more, perfect kind of thinking than ours, which is more human. And at the same time, so I don't want to even say it's the same kind of thing. I want to say that what we first and foremost think of as thinking is this thing that comes out of us, generated from the impetus that comes from our emotions. And in the absence of that, sure, computers will be able to process, or machines that we manufacture will be able to process information in extraordinary ways that we'll never be able to do ourselves. But I'm loath to equate that with the kind of thing that we immediately think of as thinking, human thinking. If we're using that term in the ordinary sense in which we normally mean it, then I would say no. Machines that we manufacture will not think in that sense, but that by no means denies the idea that we ourselves are machines.
Yeah.
Because I feel that way.
Well put. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Meaning.
Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we creating it?
Good question. We are creating it. Or you're talking about our own consciousness.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a feature of various parts of our body machine being in a certain active state. Yeah.
What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Oh, light.
Wow. Audre Lorde, the poet, says you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded and said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you gravitate towards today? And just so you know, I start these questions with cute quotes sometimes. It doesn't mean you have to apply this question, the new tool to dismantle the master's house. but you can if you want. It's just generally sort of like, what new tool do you gravitate towards today? And new is a funny word too, because sometimes, someone answered intuition. Well, that's not necessarily a new tool, but it was a tool that they wanted to say. So,
yeah. Can I think about this one for just a moment?
oh, sure. That's the whole thing is my pre-interview suggestions is silence is okay. And it's like, these are the best moments, being a experimental filmmaker, the gap is where the action is.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, I think the new tool that I gravitate to is this, which is not new at all. Of course, it's the oldest tool of all, at least as far as we humans are concerned, the hand.
Nice.
But by it, I mean understanding that we first, meaning itself comes from interaction with physical things. And it's necessary to understand that what a thing is isn't necessarily what we think it is. It's something much closer to what we do with this, with our body, with our hands. Gosh, there was teeth being pulled then.
No, that was excellent. I mean, the hand, what a basic tool that people wouldn't necessarily say. So I'm glad you got that. But just about a month ago, someone said they brought up the word toy after this. So then I followed up. What new toy do you suggest or gravitate towards?
Right.
So again, it's wide open,
Yeah. And you mean me personally?
Yeah.
Gosh, that's a stumper. I think I'm going to answer it in a strange way, and I'm going to say abstinence.
Good. Okay, we'll get deeper into that. You don't even have to expound on it.
Yeah, I'll just say it's a tool very hard to play with. A toy, I mean, toy.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Mostly, I worry about the failure to achieve things.
Wow.
Failures of achievement.
Yeah. And then McLuhan learned from a poet that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we can cope with what we don't like about them. But his main question was, why do we ignore, and I ask you this, why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though artists are broadcasting them to us?
Yeah. To the extent that that's true, it's because we use things first and foremost before we think about them. Thinking is something that is a kind of luxury that comes later. We don't, the implications, I mean, obviously it's hard to predict the implications of something that's introduced into an invention, if you like. It's very hard to predict the implications of it. And in fact, it's hard to identify what they're going to be, even when they start to appear. What they are when they start to appear, we generally look away from them because we're too occupied by the use of the thing. Yeah. The idea that artists are broadcasting it, I think there's truth in that, because I think that what's going on there, at least the way that sentence resonates for me, is that what an artist is doing is finding the time, which is the really difficult thing, to dwell with these things that are around us and not so much question them as play with them. Questioning is an intellectual activity, whereas I think what we do first and foremost as artists is try to discover things rather than invent them. And so we find the time, we have the fascination for whatever reason to get the energy to find the time to play with these things, whatever they might be, to find out what their boundaries are and what else they can be. But we're discovering rather than inventing. And yeah.
Totally agree. It's the question's more important than the answer. And I mean, that's why it's stupid. I ask these questions because I want to invent new questions. It's not, I'm not really after answers,
Right.
but it's like a jumping off point. Like,
Sure.
and that's why I say if you read this pre-interview suggestions, says you don't have to answer the question. Like people
Right.
go,
Yeah.
did I answer the question? Do artists have a moral obligation?
Humans have a moral obligation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Should artists address moral questions is a different question.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be that, I mean, for instance, we're sometimes asked why, we talked about this morning, actually, why make experimental films given Russia potentially invading Ukraine or climate change,
Right.
or what have you, or the extinction of native species, or the loss of indigenous languages? Why make experimental films? And that's a moral challenge, right? Why would you do this when there are, in that question, unstated perhaps, is why would you do this when there are more important things that you could be doing? Isn't doing that immoral? And I think, yes, it is immoral. I think we're all hypocrites. It's a very, very negative and cynical thing to say, but we are ultimately egotistical, and we can say we are concerned about the loss of a certain species of marsupial, but then we'll travel overseas several times a year, and contribute in our small way to climate change and the killing of those species. And so I think we human beings are moral creatures, and we make moral errors because we're also egotistical.
Yeah. Are you more afraid of old ideas or more afraid of new ideas?
Yeah, sometimes we talk about, Diane, my partner and I talk about the tyranny of the past versus the tyranny of the future. The tyranny of the past is this legacy of ideas that we're burdened by. Certainly, myself, I find myself more troubled, more feeling the gravity, the weight of the stuff that we have inherited as humans from ourselves, from earlier versions of ourselves. For instance, I mean, I don't mean to be. This is a big statement, and I don't necessarily want to offend anyone, but I'm going to say it. I think, for instance, religion is a problem that we have inherited from our ancient past, that we're continually born into and continually having to fight our way out of. The weight of that is something that I am, you use the word fearful of, and I think that's probably right. I wish we could I wish we could purge some of these, Stone Age ideas that we're burdened with.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I am not a radical in that I think that great things have been achieved in the past, and it's beneficial to us to remember those things. So, I'm not a complete iconoclast. I don't think we need to get rid of the past, but I do feel that there can be burdens from the past that are almost impossible to overcome. So I do fear them.
Yeah. No, go ahead. Sorry.
And I fear them, and I feel that the real problem is the human condition, that we are continually reproducing ourselves and starting at zero. Like every new generation starts at nothing, and is just this. It has to absorb all this stuff before it can then feel the space that's around it. But once it's absorbed that stuff, it's burdened with it. I kind of feel that it's extremely hard to recreate ourselves without recreating ourselves.
You must have ESP, Richard, because the next question is, can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Yeah, my earliest memory is of, I'm sure it's when I was in a cot, and it's a visual thing. I can see it still, this unidentifiable shape moving towards my eyes, and I can't pick out what that shape was, and I probably couldn't pick out what that shape was at the time, but it was so troubling that it left an impression that I can still conjure up.
Wow.
So yeah, it's like I'm sure I must have been barely alive when I had that experience.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Let's make a distinction between recall and memory. If we could recall everything, it wouldn't be a blessing. Memory is a blessing in that it filters out a lot of stuff. Obviously, it's can be problematic depending on the scale of past trauma, but nonetheless, in general, the tendency is for memory to be rose-colored. Like that's the tendency of the taint. And I think that's a benefit to us. I think total recall would be a nightmare.
Tell me.
And so memory is fallible, and it's actually, I think it's something that is continually regenerated in ourselves. Like when we think about that earliest memory, for instance, we rewrite it, and it's that process of rewriting that makes memory inherently, I think, have a tendency to be kind of optimistic or kind of beneficial to us. The process of rewriting, because rewriting involves editing and kind of correcting. I don't believe in the infallibility of memory. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and you thank you for being so articulate. You're really communicating these ideas to me, and it evokes so much in me. Because just a couple statements ago, I wanted to say this. Wyndham Lewis said, artists live in the moment, in the present, and write a detailed history of the future. Now, it sort of sounds like gobbledygook, but it sort of fits into some of what you were saying, is that, how can we live in this moment and not have rear view mirrorism and always go forward looking in the rear view mirror?
Yeah, well, at least we go forward with the baggage of the past pushing us along.
Yeah,
the momentum of the past, casts us forward, always bringing the past with it. Like it. But hang on, let me just get back to your question there. Oh, but to that statement, writing a history of the future. Yeah,
a detail, but it's also what helped me evoked that was you distinguishing between recall and memory.
Oh, yes.
That was a good distinction. See, all these questions are based on words, and I find that they work, pretty good. But
Yeah.
I like when people almost help me psychoanalyze the wording on each question, because then it blossoms more,
Yeah.
and
Well,
so, I could say, well, can you well, what I usually say, I don't say, can you recall your earliest memory? Because I use the word conjure, because people usually say, I don't remember this. My parents told me, or there's a photograph. But Richard, being a filmmaker, in you saying it was a visual thing, even the people who aren't filmmakers, it seems as though 80% of people tell me their earliest memory is something visual.
yeah, right. A visual experience. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I could imagine it being auditory as well, but
Yeah,
nonetheless, yeah, I think visual more than a narrative,
yeah,
more than saying so and so did this thing and it had this consequence. Uh,
exactly. It's
yeah.
just like the flashy thing in the crib,
Yeah.
it's so prominent and it's interesting. The kid, I interviewed this kid the other day. He's 24, a 40-year difference. It was so healthy to have that, because most of the people I interview are closer to my age.
Yeah. Sure.
And he said, I remember the first time I opened my eyes.
Wow.
And it was just like, how could that was like astounding, because it was like, that Salvador Dali paranoid critical. And when you're a kid, you rub your eyes and you see things. It's
Hmm.
all it's all experimental film. It's like if you rub your eyes when they're shut, you're like seeing an
Yeah.
experimental film.
Sure. Sure. And the challenge is to then set out to try and find something that recreates that in some way that connects with that. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? I mean, like this is how I would start making a film about that. I would think about this, think about what I'm seeing, like,
Right.
uh, and then try something with a camera that might possibly create something on the screen that connects to that, and I might. The likelihood is that I'll fail, but I'll discover something else.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I
It's
think that discoveries are going to be are always much more genuine than inventions, than predictions. You know.
Well, again, you're anticipating some questions, but before we get into that, we're getting into film soon. Like one of these guys said, "Aren't you going to ask me about film?" Tell me an early role model, someone who had an impact on you. Two parts: within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family. Just briefly, what was that impact?
Yeah, right. I think. I mean, inside your immediate family is kind of harder because I kind of find it less interesting as a question. I mean, it might be for other people, but for me, inside, I mean, the obvious person to think about is your mother or my mother.
Exactly. Well, what do you
Is that
got
hmm?
mainly? What did you mainly get from your mom?
Yeah, a, a particular sense of right and wrong and of fairness.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's right. But I mean, that's so kind of formative, and we all have this sense of right and wrong that I find it a bit too everyday. Um, oh no, actually no. There's something more fundamental that came from mum, and that is that you can go on your own path. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely, definitely. Mum was not a conformist, and I think that would be the thing that like if I didn't have that to support my own, I won't say stupid decisions, particular things that I found interesting, I might have found my childhood much more difficult. So yes, I think that the thing that she had influence on was that it's okay to to be an outsider.
Yeah. Okay. Outside your immediate family, anyone who had an impact on you, and just briefly, what was the impact?
Yeah. Well, the first person I thought of, that'll do. He was someone I worked with who was older than me, probably about 10 years older than me. And he was an early influence on me understanding what I was trying to do with cinema.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. It was when I was already kind of identifying as a filmmaker. He was able to ask me questions about what I was doing that were productive. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
those questions themselves. I mean, I think what you're doing also, asking questions, forces people to articulate their position.
Yeah.
And sometimes they haven't articulated that position before, in the same way that this guy, when he was, talking to me about what I was trying to do with cinema, he was challenging forcing me to think about whether what I was doing was a valid approach or not.
Yeah.
And that was constructive.
Yeah.
He wasn't judging me on it. He was just getting me to ask these questions of myself.
Believe me, we're getting to film soon. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Yeah, Anglican.
Did you check out, or are you still?
Oh no, long ago. Yeah.
Do you pray?
No.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Sorry.
That is a great answer. That was fast. That was sorry. That's good. You do what I say. Okay, could you curate the show over in that cloud? Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I think let's stick with a kind of everyday sense of the word evil. Yes, evil people exist. I think that's correct. But I don't want to, reify this idea of evil. It's just a person who is significantly not conforming to our normal expectations of moral behavior.
Yeah.
And if that's our definition of evil, then absolutely, evil people exist, and they're not taken over by evil. It's just because evil is not in some platonic heaven. It's just that their wiring is such that they do things that are significantly inconsistent with what we need them to do. Yeah, something like that.
That was good. This question is simply, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? I'm going to set it up with a few thoughts first. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, Richard, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Yeah. Well, maybe he's a stronger man than me. I think that for me, I don't deal well with conflict. It shakes me to my very core. And my tendency, if I feel that there's someone who's completely contrary to me and my values and what have you, I need to keep out of the way. And in doing that, I am effectively giving them support through the absence of my presence, through my absence, not being there as an enemy. On the other hand, when there is someone who or something that I'm opposed to, or an enemy in this sense, I get fixated on them, and I can't let them go. And I think this might be the sense in which Alan Watts was talking about it, in that by not being able to let them go, I'm letting them dominate my thinking, and that is unhealthy. That is effectively letting them win. And so I think that I think he's on the right path. I think it's a mind game, and I mean, it's not about whether in the world whether they win or lose or whatever. It's about whether they win or lose here, whether they're dominating you, and having an oppressive effect on you. That's the only real thing in the world. I mean, that's a sort of solipsistic thing to say, but I think that's correct. That the only thing that really determines whether someone's an enemy for you or not is what they do in here to you. So yeah, I think that Alan Watts is probably correct. And yet my advice to someone who's trying to deal with an enemy is to move away from it. Then try and put them out of your mind and keep out of their way. That's doing both things. I'm saying put it out of your mind, which is to say not let them dominate your thinking. But I'm also saying avoid that situation, which is being conscious of them and letting them win. I don't have a good answer. I don't deal with enemies well.
No, it was good. It brought up a lot, Richard. I appreciate it, because it reminded me of these younger people I work with. They study jujitsu and judo, and they said the best strategists, the best generals don't even fight the battle. They know how to, it's not like I got to do this strategy or that. They rig it so that there isn't even going to be a battle. So that's like, there's much to discuss, and you handled it well. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin over 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. What I think I have a difficulty. I'm going to answer this in a roundabout way. I have a difficulty with gallery installations where the artist, in my mind, hasn't done enough to show you what's interesting about the thing that they've presented in front, set up for you to engage with. I think interaction's a fine and noble thing, but I think I need to be convinced that they have identified something, they've found something that's actually worth my time. I want them to actually show me stuff, show me, to reveal for me, in the same way that if I make a film about a tree, I'll be trying to reveal for people more, not more than the tree, but the tree is just an impossible set of aberrations. We can't think in terms of that. We can only think in terms of one little slice. And I want to see that slice, and I want to see what's interesting about the particularness of that slice, as opposed to this other slice, which is a film about a tree made by someone else. So I think that I don't agree with Joyce, although I do think it's a healthy thing to get outside and look at trees. That's not what he meant. I think that with art, we are having revealed to us something that other people have bumped up against and discovered as a fascinating thing, and they're drawing our attention to it. So similarly, the fiction is truer. That's interesting, because this gets back to an earlier point you made, or at least something that I was thinking about with regards to an earlier quote you mentioned. I forget who it was by now, but you were talking about historians, artists being historians of the future. There's this projecting forward this creating a new path, right? A new path is a kind of new truth. And I think that, there's just this amorphous stuff in the world. And then there are these human paths that we can invent for each other and walk down. Without that path, we have nothing. Like the tree itself is kind of too much and not enough.
Really made me think, Richard. Thank you. And walk me through basically, when was the tipping point when you decided to say, I'm going to pursue filmmaking, and specifically experimental filmmaking? Did you grow up watching TV, movies, and develop this sense of that, and then go, oh, I want to make films, and then you got into experimental film? Just sort of walk me through your path.
Yeah,
where
sure.
The tipping point was.
Yeah, okay. The tipping point to film, and then there's a tipping point to experimental film. The tipping point to film, I think why someone picks up a pen, why someone is a good drawer and someone else is completely hopeless, comes down to early experiences where, for whatever reason, they got perhaps a tiny bit of reinforcement from someone else, or they happened to chance upon a particular movement, but they got a reward for doing it. And so they had this pathway open up in their brain that they then continue to walk down. Now I'm talking about literal pathways, but they're continuing to get stimulation from. So it happens at a really early point where you get a certain reward, and so you go down that, you attempt to go down that path again, and in so doing you build the path that becomes the kind of conduit for your thinking, or for your way of looking at things, or for your mode of enjoyment, or whatever it might be. You establish from this massive potential that is your brain, you establish pathways that then mutually reinforce themselves, or continually kind of develop into sharper and sharper lines. Which is to say, the tipping point was something that I wasn't conscious of, right? But at a certain point, I realized that I'd been tipped, yeah, and I'd been tipped into film. I think that point was, just now getting to a sort of historical biographical thing. I happened to chance upon the Melbourne Super 8 film group after I left high school, and I was doing a technical course in the city. And it just so happened that the technical course that at that institution is where the Melbourne Super 8 group was located. And I'd always been fascinated by Super 8, but never actually shot any or used it. And I was just lucky enough that that group was actually an experimental film group. And sure enough, I was there thinking first and foremost narratively, but the things that I was seeing weren't that. And I had my eyes opened to different ways of playing with the image and with sound. That was, immediately satisfying. Why was it immediately satisfying? Because I was ready for it already, because of earlier stuff that had gone on. Because other people would walk into that room and just say, well, there's nothing going on here, well, this is boring, or what have you. But for me, something about the stuff that was happening on the screen was immediately stimulating. And that in the path of experimental film. My first thoughts about cinema, about making cinema, however, were formalistic. Narrative cinema, but that was formalistic narrative cinema. I was very much influenced by the idea of Ozu, my idea of Ozu, as opposed to what Ozu actually was, Yasujiro Ozu. And I wanted to, try and come up with a contemporary Melbourne cinema that was, in some way connecting with the kind of formal patterns and structures that he was engaged with. But what I find interesting thinking about that in retrospect is that, yes, the kind of narrative cinema that I was interested in is connected to the kind of experimental cinema that I do. It was formalistic and highly structured and minimalistic as well. And the question then, the deeper question is, why those particular things? Why did those particular things take my interest? And as once again, I say that comes just from early lost experiences, lost moments of reward from that kind of thing, based on the kind of hardware that I started out with.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, that was good. A screenwriting teacher told me a great film is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great film is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process?
My creative process, intention, I like to deny. I like to, I don't think we can ever get away from it. I think we're meaning-making machines, and we're always having an intention. Because that's how we get about in the world. Without that, we just, we can't see, we can't do anything. Like meaning is kind of formative. However, I like to deny the idea of intention in my work. I like to focus on, as I've said repeatedly already, discovery. Focus on finding stuff that stimulates things going on in my brain more than I like having a conceptual drive. So I kind of make a distinction between, an approach to art that is more conceptual and an approach to art that is more perceptual. And I like to see myself in the latter camp. I think that concepts and stuff that you might call intention, the kind of meaning of the film, will always come. You need to first and foremost find something more fundamental, that is some visual fascination that is driving the thing, some visual sense of, perfection or whatever it might be, beauty, something like that, much more so than a meaning. So I agree with Kubrick, but Kubrick might be saying you need to, as the filmmaker, hide the intention.
Yeah.
And, be crafty in that. And that makes sense. But I want to go a step further. It makes sense that you should want to hide the craft, right? Hide the trickery, like a magician. Doesn't want you to see how it's done. Doesn't want you to say, oh, I see, you just slid that card in there. They want that to be a mystery. I think that's probably what Kubrick means. He means that a well-crafted film obscures the crafting, at least doesn't draw attention to it. However, I think that the films that we find fascinating are typically, and even ideally, fascinating not for reasons that the filmmaker had in mind.
No.
Right? Yeah. I mean, Ozu, would sit out and him and his screenwriter Kogo Noda would sit there and drink sake and come up with a plot and say, we should do this for this reason and this for that reason. But what we find fascinating in an Ozu film aren't those little plot structures. They're part of what makes it satisfying, but what we find really interesting is stuff to do with their aesthetic sense. Stuff to do with the way they frame things and the way they time things and the kinds of things that they have people say, rather than the actual words.
Really well put. Thank you, Richard. And Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your audience, your viewing audience, when you're making your film?
Yeah, that's an interesting question and kind of debatable. I think on the one hand, it's typical for people like me to say, I don't think about the audience. I make this thing for myself. And there's a lot of truth in that, because you have to husband your own intuitions as a filmmaker or as any kind of artist. You have to kind of be protective of your these little things that you're fascinated about, that is driving your creative process. So you can't be always questioning those in terms of what other people are doing. You need to look after them in terms of what other people might think of them. I mean, you need to say, look, my intuition is the best I've got to go by, right? So I can't be thinking about what's your intuition going to be about my film, what's your experience going to be. At the same time, The thing about time-based art is that you need to take into account the experience of the what you're asking of the film goer. You know, what you're asking of the person sitting in the symphony hall. What you're asking is that they come in on time and listen to the whole thing or see the whole thing and stay to the end. And you need to bear in mind that needs to be a reasonable ask. It needs to be a reasonable thing for you to ask them. Yeah. So to that extent, I think one has the audience in mind. But by and large, you have to go with your own intuitions about what's interesting. And so not have what you think they might find interesting. If you're doing what you think they might find interesting, that it has to be inherently ingenuine.
Yeah, one pioneer experimental filmmaker told me the ideal time is 8 minutes. Then you got Christian Marclay's The Clock, it's 24 hours long. You know, and it's more that installation idea. Just come in and watch a couple hours if you want. It doesn't matter. So yeah, I like your sensibility with both those, the concept and percept, the audience thing. You said framing, and I want to just squeeze this question in really quick. What formed your framing aesthetic? So we know as filmmakers, we go like this, 1:3:3, or whatever aspect ratio. But there's something, that you go like this, or you go like that, Tell me just how you formed your framing aesthetic, or what guided it.
The idea of mise-en-scène, the idea of the proscenium, whatever that proscenium is, and so in traditional cinema, it's a 4x3, rectangle. The idea of the proscenium is the thing that guides me. Whatever that happens to be, it's the relation of the bodies within that frame to each other and the frame. Now, what is that relation? Well, it's one that I find satisfying. It's down to my intuitions, but that's not something you can, but that's not something that I can probably, I don't know if I could even articulate what it is that I find satisfying. Suffice it to say, it's about me, how bodies are moving in space. So the idea of the frame or the proscenium, the thing that bounds the decision-making, decision-making puts the wrong emphasis on it. The choices that the makers have made, which is not to talk so much about how one frames. I remember when I was working as a camera person on other people's films, I did like, certain kind of framing rather than others. I would find a certain thing harmonious rather than another thing. Now, you can see that in the history of cinema. You see all kinds of attitudes towards the placement of objects within the frame, and clearly the makers found each of those framings more or less satisfying. Like you can say that Cassavetes does a certain thing, whereas Orson Welles does something else in terms of their framing, in terms of the formalness, in terms of the looseness, in terms of the variation that occurs from one frame to another frame. Like some filmmakers will use a great big wide angle lens, then a narrow lens, which completely changes the relationships between the objects within the frame. Other filmmakers, like Ozu, for instance, will always use the same lens. So there's always this same relationship. What makes one set of framing more satisfying than another is just down to synapses. Why I tend towards finding more classical framing satisfying in general, but not absolutely. That's ineffable.
Well, it's interesting because I asked Bruce Bailey this question at the Ann Arbor Film Festival several years ago, and he said, well, Jean Cocteau said he got his framing from the way you put your silverware knife and fork on the plate on the dinner table.
Yeah.
You know, and I thought that was
That's
hilarious.
lovely.
But I sort of insist we developed framing aesthetics from a bunch of people who painted paintings and then shot photographs. You know, the history of that is older than cinema, in that
Yeah.
that framing sensibility sort of came from that. So
yes, and so consequently, I mean, I do think that getting back to this idea of you know, we invent paths are partly cast down in front of us for us to walk on, and partly something that we generate for ourselves. I think we start off with the you know, sense of proportions. I mean, I like this dinner plate idea and the you know, the classical painting idea. We start with that. This is baggage that comes to us whether we want it to or not. But then once we get feedback from our own doing, from our own you know, looking through the eyepiece and then seeing the results, we can lead ourselves down in different directions. Yeah, so I guess, you know, framing is something that is in flux, that, you know, your own framing will change if you keep putting the eyepiece to your eye.
Yeah.
You know, you'll find.
I saw that Power a Dog the other night, and it was just like the classics, the Searchers John Ford shot, you know, in the barn, and it was like, oh yeah, she got that from John Ford. So ever. McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness. So clothing extends our skin, knife and fork extends our teeth. The shutter in a camera or a projector extends our eyelid. What does the Super 8mm film camera extend for you? What humanness?
Yeah. I think that's interesting. I think a lot about the relation between humans and the our artifacts, our technology. And one thing that people have seen our shows often hear us talk about is the idea of the humanness of the machine, which I think is something, and when I say machine, I mean the mechanical machine. And I'm thinking first and foremost about the apparatus of cinema in comparison to the digital machines that we are, digital devices, let's say, that we're saturated with nowadays. I think the digital saturation has brought to light the humanness of the machines that we have around us, had around us in particular. And what's human about them, from my point of view, is how we can understand them, how intelligible they are, you know, how we can work out what they're doing. When machines first came on the scene, like industrial machines, the Industrial Revolution, people saw machinery as horrific. I think so. Anyway, I think this is the general consensus, that the machine was considered contrary to the organic nature of our existence and something that was going to fundamentally change us in a destructive way. And yeah, there's truth in that. I incorporate, to connect with what you're saying, when we invent these things, they become part of us. So we are in those things, and we became more mechanical through the invention of, you know, through the industrial age and through the Industrial Revolution and what have you. I nonetheless think that the humanness of the intelligibility of mechanical machines is actually more endearing to us, especially now in this digital realm where we're confronted with a technology that we can't look at and understand. All we can do is kind of be assailed by it. We can't you know, we can't understand its language, if you like. All we can do is you know, listen to it or whatever. I'm having difficulty articulating this, but I do feel there's a fundamental difference between digital technology and mechanical technology, in the fact that with the mechanical, we know what it's doing. With digital, we can only use the options that's provided for us. Like, you know, Apple come up with a design for their software. We can use the choices that they've already laid out for us, but we can't discover new ones.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I've got off your question. Your question was the Super 8 camera. Yeah, I'm just going to think about cameras in movie cameras in particular, because I feel they're the same thing, a 16mm camera and a Super 8 camera. However, Super 8 camera changes. This is off topic, but there's an interesting difference between a Super 8 camera and a video camera. The difference is this. Here's my Super 8 camera. I'm filming now. Here's a video camera. Hang on. Oh, shit. Yeah, right. Okay, it's on now. It's going. Yep. Okay. Whereas with a Super 8 camera, you go and then stop, and then stop. And there's something immediate about Super 8 that I think is lost with the digital technology. Curiously, with the digital stuff, you have to just leave it on if you want to capture something. With Super 8, you can just go, oh, bang, there it is. So in terms of humanness, there isn't the digital delay with Super 8. And I think that's human.
Yeah. Really intense, because most people say, what does a movie camera extend? Your eye. Well, McLuhan said it extends your foot because you're traveling. But there's a movie you have to see if you haven't, and get it, Beyond the Bolex. Have you seen this documentary?
I'm not sure that I have.
Anyways, you would know if you saw it, because the woman worked 16 years on it. She just happened to be the granddaughter of the guy who invented the Bolex. And she goes up to her film teacher and goes, I think I'm going to make a documentary on my grandfather. He invented the Bolex. And the film teacher went, what? And so she shot some great folks in it who have passed. Jonas Mekas. Barbara Hammer says, the Bolex is an extension of my arm and I can dance with it, So anyway,
actually, I want to respond to that, if I may.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you are attuned to using, whatever tools you might use as an artist, then it becomes an extension. It's something you think through. It's something you begin to perceive through. You see, when you're sitting on a tram and you don't have your Bolex in your hands, you nonetheless look out the window and you think, oh, I see what that would do if I had my Bolex with me. Yeah? So it shapes your perceptions. It becomes inside you. The more time you dwell with these machines, the more you become you go inside them and they come inside you. And so we do change with machines. There we are. I like what Barbara Hammer had to say, like saying, it's a reflexive tool. What did she say in particular? It extends my...
Well, they really have great footage of her holding it and sort of almost dancing with it. And she said, it extends my arm and extends my body, And it's
I find it actually stimulates you to dance, or me anyway, personally. When you're holding the thing, you're encouraged, just because it's the thing that perhaps because it's moving pictures, because I don't think a painter would do this. No, I think this is right. I think that the movie camera seduces you into physical contortions and moving your body around in space more than you would if you didn't have it with you. I think that's quite interesting.
Dude, that's Jean Rouge says it's more true if I put a camera between me and you than if there's no camera. which is ridiculous sounding, but it's almost like sort of what you just said. And there's one other thing I just wanted to plug is, if you haven't heard of Phil Hoffman's Film Farm north of Toronto, Canada, where
of course.
Yeah. I mean, I would hope you would attend some year, because it sounds like you'd be I was very fortunate to go there several years ago, and it was an amazing experience.
We have we live in the country, and I want to replicate the film farm here.
Yeah, I figured you knew about it.
Yeah. So we've just built a sort of bunkhouse for people, and we've just built an outdoor cinema on the land next door to us, and the idea is to do a protracted, say, 7 or 10 day block. I think we're in a good position because we can bring people down from Asia to have a concentrated time with us. I want to go to Film Farm as I guess one of their, not as a participant, but as a tutor. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because Phil had an experience with Peter Green, who sets up the next question. Peter Green, and you touched on this already a little, Richard. Peter Green says cinema is much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers.
Absolutely. I agree. It's a real shame. It's a real shame.
It's been hijacked by narrative for 100. It's only 130 years old, and most about 120 years is narrative. But the question is stupid, but basically you can jump off wherever you want to. Are experimental filmmakers telling stories a different way or doing something completely different? If me and you watch The Flicker by Tony Conrad right now, we might have a story go through our heads, but it's not sort of literally a narrative or storytelling.
Yeah.
Though Andrew Noren says if you put one frame next to another frame, that's narrative, that's storytelling. So any way you want to approach those thoughts, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, look, I think that's correct. Put one frame in front of another, and you've got something that you could call a story. If you want to be generous with your idea of story, what the word means.
Yeah.
In general, I resent the word more than I would be happy to employ it. And the reason I resent it is because film schools spend so much of their time talking about visual storytelling and emphasizing what is really a literature approach to cinema, a story writing. I mean, they specifically by story, they mean the thing that you could, just turn around and relate to someone rather than have to show them. Yeah. Whereas should be about something that you can only get from actually, seeing the thing. That first and foremost is what cinema is. And I think while I agree with the idea of saying, you can watch The Flicker, and sure enough, there's something that we can say is story-like about it. It's not the normal sense of the word story. We're extending it. And I think we're actually doing ourselves a disservice because we're playing into the game of prioritizing story in cinema. Whereas I'd rather just, say film can also have stories, but really what's going on is this. In good films, what we've got is a visual experience that can only be had by watching this film, not say what cinema is. Well, this character did this and then this happened, which is the narrative thing. Obviously, narrative implies structure and shape and development and all of these things. And I tend to feel that most good films have those things, but don't have a story.
Yeah, it also evokes the other. Peter Greenaway said, Marty Scorsese ain't doing anything much different than D.W. Griffith. And it's not, he's a good filmmaker, but it's actually sort of true. So what? You're filming a play.
Yeah, right. Yes.
So
I mean,
Michael
that's a harsh.
Yeah.
That's harsh.
Yeah.
I think there is actually stuff going on in Martin Scorsese over and above the play. Yeah. Much time and effort is spent on the play.
Yeah. But, you can watch Marty's documentary on how Cubism affected cinema and how cinema affected Cubism, 45-minute doc, free on YouTube. And you're like, okay, I forgive you for all that fucking mafia shit.
Yeah, right. Yes. Yeah, good. Okay, I won't do that.
I'm not dissing him. I think he's an important filmmaker. Basically, Michael Apted, who just passed, I asked him 40 years ago, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? Most people don't know Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922, but it flourished in the 80s with MTV. And Marty even said, I cut my films faster because of MTV. And what Michael Apted said is, because we can learn to take in information faster. So I asked this question with a bias. Can we literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
Oh, no, you can. I mean, in the same way that if an alien came to you and started speaking in their language, you wouldn't take in information at all. And then eventually you might get a very little bit of information. But after a while, you'll be conversing with this person. The speed of information absorption from this alien will rapidly change. Will change from being none at all to rapid. In the same way that we can be, familiarized with an art form or any other medium, such that through that, after that process of familiarization, we can take information more quickly. That said, I want to answer the question why MTV editors cut so quickly. And the answer in my mind is lack of confidence. They don't trust what they've found. They are saying to you, look, I found this technical thing, this interesting thing, this visual thing that I can do, but don't worry, I'm going to move on to something else any second. I don't need you to spend time with it because, like you, I don't trust it. And what I mean by trust is I don't have confidence that what I've actually got is interesting. I'd rather just tickle your fancy.
That's good. It's so, wow. Is it literally possible to multitask?
Literally, no. I don't think we have multiple cores. But is it possible to be in charge of multiple things that are going on at the same time? Yes. I can have two machines running and be monitoring them both. And as long as they both behave themselves, then it'll be fine. But I'm necessarily going to be flitting my attention. And if multitasking means, if it literally means something synchronic, that is happening at the same time, no.
What was the motive of the cave artist? Not what anthropologists or Herzog said, just your guess or hunch.
Yeah. They were stimulated by these lines that they put on the rocks and they wanted more. I think. Secondary to that, it might be that they're also stimulated by the animals or what have you that they saw and they wanted more of them. I think, in both instances, I've used the word want and or wanting more, and I think that's the motivation. In fact, that is motivation, wanting more. So, I mean, I haven't answered the question. I've talked around in circles. They were getting a buzz from their brains from doing this thing, and so they wanted to recreate that. Yeah, I honestly think that's what's going on. They discovered that, I mean, consistent with earlier discoveries of just, piling rocks together or whatever and saying, that's doing something for me. Putting a line, like getting ochre and putting a line on a wall and then curving it and realizing that that's not just a line, but now it's a cow. Or they wouldn't have had cows, but you know what I mean. Now it's a mountain lion or whatever it might be. That shift in realization gave them a buzz, and they wanted more.
Beautiful. T.S. Eliot said poetry is outing your inner dialogue. Richard, what language is your inner dialogue in?
Gee, he's very trusting of poetry. I don't trust poetry, personally. Anyway, my inner dialogue is in um, the spatial relation between bodies. Yeah, I think that's, if I want to say something like T.S. Eliot said, it would be along those lines.
Yeah.
I think because what I mean by inner dialogue is obviously I think about things sometimes. I think about whether I should mow the lawn or drive into town and have a coffee or whatever it is. I think about these things, and that's an inner dialogue. And in those instances, I'm thinking, conceptually, should I achieve this task or can I put it off until tomorrow? I actually articulate it in those terms. Whereas when I'm not, like at a more fundamental level, what's going on is just enjoying or experiencing the placement of objects within space.
Yeah.
I think that comes first.
Beautiful. Two experimental film pioneers, George Manupelli, his mantra is ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas said there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor, the great jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. I know it's both and it depends, but just basically your hunch. Is art making, filmmaking, experimental filmmaking, more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever culture or technology is dominant?
Oh, the latter. Yeah. But that said, culture and the technology is nothing without us individuals pushing into it. It's like the difference between there being a red in Plato's heaven or just a whole lot of red things. All there are is a whole lot of red things, and they're our culture and technology. And we have only those red objects in front of us with which to think about, and with which to use. They're not actually us. We're just pushing them around. So yeah, I believe that I don't think some force is coming through me and coming out on the screen, but rather I am a slave to its possibilities.
Yeah.
I'm just feeling around,
Yeah, I like that. Can art making be egoless?
Well, my first reaction to that is to say no, because but that's thinking in terms of ego as the driving thing that gets us out of bed and gets us, sitting in front of an editing bench or whatever it might be, and wanting to try and achieve something rather than doing nothing. So I don't think you can make art without there being an ego to do it. That said, does the art itself have to contain in some way or express that ego? And I think that's getting back to your earlier question. No, I don't think it does. Ego is relevant just as the driving impetus, not as the thing that they're thereby created. So I think the thing that's created is egos, if it's any good.
Is perception reality?
No, it's a fabrication. Yeah. It's a fabrication. I believe in the kind of nominal world, the worlds of the things in themselves. However, that world is not as complex as the thing we usually think of as reality. Reality has all of the stuff in it, like political intrigue and complex emotions and what have you. Whereas the things in themselves are just the real things, the non-cultural things are just bits of matter. They're just lumps. It's like the difference between a human being and a corpse. A corpse is just a lump of meat, whereas a human being is able to do things with their hands. It's something that can hold a hammer or can argue with you or can make love to you or something like that, whereas a lump of meat is not. But I think that the reality, there is a reality that is just the lump of meat. Having said that, Jerry, I think I've talked myself around to saying that the perceptual realm, the phenomenal realm, the realm of experience, which it contains the world of culture and all of that, and meaning, is really what we mean by reality.
Yeah.
That the nominal world is so obscure, so impossible for us to see, impossible for us to experience. By definition, it's unexperienceable, that it may as well not be real. All there is the world of perceptions in terms of our experience. No, I've talked myself around. I think that perceptions are the real thing. Yeah. If we're prepared to take perceptions as involving, I mean, I don't just see an outline. I see Jerry, right? That's what I'm perceiving. I'm perceiving an aspect of your you-ness insofar, and I'm seeing books behind you. I'm not just seeing stripes, and photographs on a fridge, not just patches of color. And so perceptions are always meaningful, and yeah, I know. I think that's what's real. Yeah. There is stuff underneath that, but it's insignificant.
You sussed that out beautifully, and it reminded me of Coleman Miller made a film that's really important. If you haven't seen it, look it up on YouTube. Uso Justo. It's a fake experimental film. It was Bruce Conner's favorite film. Have you ever seen it? It's like a spoof of experimental films, but it's well done.
What's the first word?
USO.
Justo.
Uso. Justo. Uso Justo. And I basically said, is perception reality? And Coleman went, that's all you got.
Well, it is all we've got. That's right. Yeah, I came around to saying that. How do you know it's a fake experimental film? What does it even mean?
Well, I don't want to he basically spoofs experimental film tropes. So
it's a pastiche.
But it is an experimental film. And they took, but you will give me your feedback on it after you've seen it, because you've seen so many experimental films. How many fake experimental films have you seen?
Yeah. A lot of things on MTV.
They're usually not, experimental films haven't spoofed themselves. Like maybe Hollis Frampton, and though a few guys have sort of spoofed their own work, but basically experimental filmmakers take themselves too seriously.
Yeah, that's right. to do something like that. Yeah.
It's sort of like Ernie Kovacs and Tex Avery making an experimental film.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Whereas I could imagine just not having seen it, I could imagine such a film being an experimental film. They're saying, by them saying, what does it mean for me to do this? What does it mean for me to deliberately copy or pick up on or pastiche tropes that are out there and put them together like this, and then put it in front of you? I mean, it's this sort of Duchamp question then. It's a conceptual thing.
Totally. And now it's NFTs. No fucking thing. That's the experimental film is NFTs, and artists are like, but I don't want to get into it too deep because I avoided the question, but it's like, you can't make your living being an experimental filmmaker per se, but you can teach. Yeah. And, what happens is all the great experimental filmmakers teach at all the rich art schools, and then their students are clones of the teachers. And usually the first film they make is the cloniest of the teacher, and that's their best film. So, I mean, I've seen it in Ann Arbor. We're about to celebrate our 60th year, and I've gone for, most 40, 30 years of the festival. And you just see this, well, if it's experimental, you shouldn't be able to define it, but you can define it, So all the power to, I mean, I'm sure it's a question I asked you. Tell me one element of your sensibility, creativeness in experimental film that's changed in one element that stayed the same in the years you pursued it.
Yeah, well, stayed the same is quite easy. A concern with making as much as I can from a little, like finding value in a kind of minimalism, an approach of, trying to turn something over as many times as possible to see how many different things it can be. That's consistent. What's changed? I think an understanding of what's changed is an understanding of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I think there's a tremendous amount more that I could do, but in terms of my understanding, but I think what's changed is seeing what I was doing in my early experimental films, and then trying to bring those things to the fore. Yeah. Actually being conscious of those things, conscious of those devices that I was attempting.
Yeah, I asked Phil Solomon all these same questions, and he used to say a great thing. He goes, "I'm a professional experimental filmmaker," and I loved him saying that, because it's like, yeah, you teach and you got a couple films shown at Sundance. So what? And when he died, he had a third of a page obit in the New York Times. Right. But he still, people don't know what experimental film is in general. And it's people like you who believe in it and keep it going. And that's what's important to me. I mean, I don't mind it being a small marginalized thing. In the perfect world, it would be integrated and we'd have it everywhere, and it would be.
Yes.
Yeah. So Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength, rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Mistrust, I think, is a weakness. Yet I feel it's a strength in that it forces a critical attitude.
Yeah. That's good. I asked for 90 minutes. Can you go a little longer?
Sure.
Okay. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Do you mean in art or in life?
Again, you put it in the context you want.
Yeah.
You can do both if you want, or yeah.
Sure. I think in life, compromise is much more important.
Yeah.
I think because conviction is, in my mind, very close to arrogance.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's enough on that. Yeah, I think that's how I feel.
Enough, because that's when you enabled me to. Richard, there's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got right. That's what I fish for. But everybody, 90% people say conviction.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, I think we already have conviction. You got it. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like this other question I asked. It's stupid, but it's, why do we have to name a destination or have a destination if the journey's more important? because psychogeography and the flaneurs say just wander around and you'll bump into something, you know. But
Yeah.
we have to, you know, have a goal, you know.
Yeah, I think that's part of our. I want to say something bigger than human condition. It's sort of something. It's to do with our life condition. It's. I think the amoeba had it too. We are driven. We have. Heidegger used the word care. We're driven. We have Zorga in Heidegger's term, but we have this want, as to put it in terms of what the cave painters had, and that want is a projection of a destination, even though the destination is impossible. That destination provides a structure around which something like happiness can hang to.
Yeah. So there's a saying that goes, you create what you resist, or one creates what they resist. Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into you are what you hate. James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. And Buñuel nailed it. Thank God I'm an atheist. So,
yeah.
Richard, your thoughts on this? Not you, but one creates what one resists. You create what you resist. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, because I find that quote slightly different from the others. The difference being you are actually perpetuating that which you resist in you create what you resist. Whereas the quote about having so much religion in your head, having your mind so occupied by something you purport to detest, that's, you're not actively kind of recreating that in necessarily. Whereas in the first one, you are creating what you resist. I think that if just taking that quote, you create what you resist. Is that right? Is that the quote?
That's it.
Yeah. I don't relate to that.
Yeah.
I don't relate to that. I do relate to the others. Because, you know, the others, like, thank God I'm an atheist. And well, more interestingly, the one before that, the thing is that this stuff is laid out for us to bump into, and it assails us because of our concern, because of our care, because of our wanting stuff. We want things to be otherwise than they are, and the activeness of that wanting is why we fixate on religion. If we're against religion, for instance. It's why we fixate on the Republican Party if we're against them. We want to understand them. We want to fill our head with them in order to undermine, perhaps, or at least in order to project what we are. You know, in order to make our own stamp, in order to create ourselves. But I don't know if, you know, if we resist the Republican Party, we don't create them.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, what you're saying is, again, you're a really good listener because you actually listen. Most people don't listen. They just hear the question and they jump into it. And sometimes they listen a little. But I would say both Frank Zappa and Louis Buñuel resisted the religion, and James Joyce. They resisted the religion that was so much a part of them that it was the essence of what they were doing, or not complete essence, but a lot of the drive. So they sort of, it was more like the other morphing. And I like how you broke it down because it helped me rethink the question. It's like what you resist persists. So like they resist their Catholic upbringing, but it persists because they're constantly regurgitating it in their art.
Not letting it go. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. They are continually embodying it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I can I can relate to that in the same way that I carry with me the voices of various Liberal Party, which is our Republican Party, politicians in my head. And I often hear them in the street, or hear them in my dreams. And in that way, I am keeping their intonation and their being alive in my head.
But it might be your way of raising your consciousness to counter it. See, that's the other thing.
That's the point.
That's we can't gauge. It's like Kubrick, because you brought up Kubrick. I love this question. Both Buñuel and Kubrick really quick is, did Kubrick pull Clockwork Orange from UK screens only as a publicity stunt, or he really believed these hoodlums were going to come and beat up his family, and his film caused hoodlums to beat up winos? Now, I mean, he didn't pull it from the entire world, only UK screens, because the UK cops said, dude, they're going to come and get your kids, And he might not consciously go, well, this will be great PR for the film, but at the same time, I don't think he said my film is causing kids to beat up winos. Right.
But I think it was.
You think his film did cause it?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, yeah. I do. I mean, I think I'm not a Kubrick fan. I think he makes all sorts of violence, including sexual violence, look sexy, like a lot of Hollywood films, although he's not Hollywood. I don't think that's productive. I think making things look sexy is not. If you really don't like it, you need to make it look not sexy.
Yeah.
Whereas,
yeah.
I do think. Yeah. Okay.
No, I'm glad you said that, because again, this is why I need people like you to suss out the bigger picture for me, because we get caught up in our ways of thinking, and we don't always want to entertain. They said seeing is believing was switched to believing is seeing. You only see the stuff you already believe in.
Yeah, I entirely agree with that. Yeah, because I think this comes back to perception, the nature of perception. What we perceive is already inside our heads. We turn this object into a fridge and not a lump of metal or a rock or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's already in us.
Yeah. Can you forget to die?
Could you say that again?
Can you forget to die?
Dying is one of those interesting things because it's something that you have to do yourself. No one can do it for you. Can you forget to do it? I think that's an interesting little puzzle. I think it's hard. Oh, gee. Far out. Can you forget to die? I mean, on the one hand, I want to say that one is always conscious that we are, propelling ourselves towards death all the time. And that's where our want comes from. That's where our concern comes from. The fact that, time is short and we must get something done. On the other hand, I think other creatures have this same concern, and they're not aware. I don't believe a dog is aware that it's going to die.
Yeah.
And yet they have this same concern. Perhaps there's something simpler going on. We're certainly aware that we can hurt ourselves. We're aware that things can happen to us. But can you forget to die? You can forget that we are dying. That you and I, as we sit on this chair, we're in the process of disappearing from the planet. Just personally, we're replaced by other people. You can forget that. I don't know if you can forget to die. I think it's going to happen to you, and there's no. I think once it's happened too, I think that you're gone, so there's no there's no remembering
Yeah.
to do it.
Yeah. It's how do you find peace of mind?
Hmm. I'm going to be totally honest and say that, and this may sound more dramatic than I mean it to be, but probably in alcohol.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not an alcoholic, but I do find peace of mind in that experience. Yeah, yeah.
This I'll never forget this music scholar I interviewed several months ago. What's the best thing for a human being? He goes, beer. I says, what gives you the most optimism? He goes, my heating blanket. I mean, it was a very practical,
Yeah,
real answer.
yeah, right.
So we're winding down. I slipped the last question I just asked you, but ignore that you heard that. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would
Wow.
you say to your 12-year-old self?
Oh, just don't worry about other people.
Yeah,
Don't worry about it. No one knows any more than you do.
beautiful.
It's not quite what I mean, but something like that. I would certainly try and instill, the idea of not judging yourself all the time.
Yeah. Let's go back to Alan Watts for a second. These are 5 quickies, just in a few words. Who started it all?
We did.
Are we going to make it?
No.
Where do we put it?
Where do we put it? Just in front of us.
Who's cleaning it up?
Nobody.
Is it serious?
No.
Wow, that was good. Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
Oh, definitely over. I usually think.
Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Something good that I never had.
It's good. You never had it, but you never want it.
A near-death experience.
Oh, that's heavy. I've never had that answer. I've had immortality.
Oh,
That's
yes.
a weird answer, isn't it? They don't. It's good. We don't. Yeah, but we never had it. Never want it. So that's. So you touched on this earlier, slightly, and Thornton Wilder said in 1928 that art is confession. Art is the secret told, but art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. Again, this is a stupid question, but I love the quote so much. So you can go off anyway. Basically, you've laid your cards on the table for almost 2 hours, Richard. Thank you so much. And I'm not insinuating you haven't answered this, but what's it really all about for you?
Yeah. I think in terms of art, what for me, it's all about fascination. Now, is revealing the quote, talked about some kind of self-exposing that you wish to hide through art. Art is certainly revealing that you might wish to hide. Sorry, art is certainly revealing of that which you are fascinated by. You know, you kind of take your shirt off and show everything with art, but it's not that you are doing it consciously. It's just you can't help but do it because you're driven to do it, and that which you show is that which you're fascinated by. You can't. You're not going to be showing something else if it's any good as art. So you're showing yourself, even though you mightn't even know who that is.
Yeah, that's good. And just to add, the McLuhan thing mid-career was he switched the medium as the message to the user as the content. So I like to say, once you create your art, it's no longer yours. It's the user, and they can use it however they want.
Absolutely. That's definitely the case. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I spoke just then of it revealing you. Well, yes, it does, but only insofar as other people. Only insofar as the thing that other people get from it is actually yours, and there's real limits to that. I think that when you look at a Picasso painting, your experience is your experience. It's not Picasso's, but you're seeing something about Picasso, and someone else is seeing something else about Picasso, whether Picasso knew it or not. But it's not the same. It's your experience. So it's out there. I certainly don't think the author is the authority.
Yeah,
absolutely. I don't think that.
Yeah, Frank Zappa has a line, "You don't want to see what's behind my eyes." And that's interesting.
Yeah,
you know,
it's also threatening.
it's that's why he asked the question, who are the brain police? He didn't say,
Right.
oh, the brain police are these evil consumer capitalists. No, or maybe the brain police are inside your head, and that's what you caving into their creating false needs. So he didn't say which it is. He just says, who are the brain police? You know, he posed the question rather than telling you.
Yeah.
So just a couple more, but if Clinton is there, Clinton used to jump in and ask a question or two, and maybe he is, and maybe he's not going to. So we'll give him a second. Okay, it doesn't look like he is, but that's all right. We appreciate his help. Got two more questions here, Richard. This has really been fun, man. I feel like we're old pals hanging out in the Ann Arbor Film lobby. This is you know, have you ever entered the Ann Arbor Film Festival?
Sure. I've got a film this year in the coming festival too.
Oh, you got one in this year?
Yeah, I've been a number of times. Yeah.
Good, but we haven't met there.
You know, your face is familiar, Jerry, but you just may be one of those presences that you know, you can't help but see.
But how did we hook up? I don't even
through
know.
Alex McKenzie.
Oh, there you go. Thank God for Alex. That was great. Yes. That was really super for him to hook us up. Yeah. Well, I'm good. Congratulations. Are you going to the festival?
No, sadly.
Because I'm going to give a presentation on Thursday. But
anyway, when is the festival?
Like 21 to 27 of March.
Oh, yes. Okay. When you said Thursday. Oh, you mean the Thursday of the festival. I thought, wow,
yeah,
is it coming up this week?
Yeah, the 24th. Yeah.
So I've been a number of times, but now just doesn't seem like the right time to go to the US.
Oh, no. Yeah. I mean, I was not. I watched the festival 2 years in a row on a laptop. Well, in my bed, and it was like, wow, that was so much easier as you get older, you know, and to travel and all that. Yeah. And now this year I was like, oh, I don't really want to go, but they're like, it's the 60th and it's going to be live. So I thought, well, okay. So
where do you live, Jerry?
I live in Venice, California. So I'm on the other side of the country. Yeah.
Right. And what do you do? I haven't asked that.
I do nothing effectively. No, I've been in experimental film, and I don't know, what do I do? I'm an antiquarian ne'er-do-well. I don't know.
Right.
You can read my Wikipedia page. That's what it's.
Yeah, sure. It's just, you've mentioned Ann Arbor a few times. I wonder if you were connected. That's all.
Yeah, no, I've given presentations in Ann Arbor Film Festival like 15 times over 30 years.
Right. Then I
Like,
must have seen you there on the stage.
it's usually in the little side rooms, not on the big stage.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. But it seems as though you're the type of person that, to me, the Ann Arbor Film Festival, it's not what squiggly line you see on the screen. It's the people you're talking to in the lobby. It's
Sure.
so
Yeah.
much the community. Of course,
Yeah.
you want to go in there and see the stuff, but it's like, it really is a small world. The experimental film world's small. It's not like, and I sort of wallow in it.
It's a delight in that respect.
Say it again.
It's a delight in that respect. The experimental
It's a delight in that respect. Yeah. So last two questions, Richard. Thank you. What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
Wow, inspires me. Gosh. Oh, yeah. I'm just trying to put it into words. I mean, I don't think it hasn't always been with us, but I am inspired by people who are able to live outside of capitalism.
Yeah.
And I think that's, actually, more importantly than that, I think this stuff with the shifting pronouns is a challenge to an old guy like me, and I'm inspired by that challenge. And certainly the increasing tolerance, the greater tolerance, and the Black Lives Matter kinds of movements, the backlash against them is the complete opposite, completely uninspired by that.
Yeah.
But that period where everybody seemed to be on board with those kinds of movements was inspiring.
Yep.
It felt like things were changing, and to a certain extent, they must be changing. It's not changing everybody at the same time.
Yeah.
I think that's inspiring.
Yeah. Raising awareness. I'm totally for all the movements, and I love you about the pronouns, because I'm like what the heck, and then the challenge to understand why that is being forced on us, because I had to fill out the application. What pronoun do you want to go by? I go, what?
I find it uncomfortable. I'm not, and yet, so I talk to young people about it a lot to try and listen to their perspectives and see, and see if I can learn from it, because I don't think it's frivolous.
No. It's like I asked George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic, what kind of music do you like? He goes, the kind of music that pisses me off, so I can figure out why it's pissing me off.
Right.
Like, why don't I like this? So last question is, what gives you the most optimism?
Yeah, there's a difference. I mean, my intuition is to answer that question by what gives me the most solace, but that's different. Solace I get from the fact that the planet will survive no matter what, and life will continue no matter what. But that's not optimism. That's something else. That's like resignation. Optimism, I think, I get from the speed at which young people can take up information.
Yeah.
I think I get optimism from the capacity that the human enterprise is brilliant even though it has the burdens that I talked about of being encumbered by the past, I get optimism from the fact that we're able to think our way through this. I'm optimistic about that.
Yeah.
When I say this, I mean whatever it is, everything. I'm not talking about climate change, which is the most pressing thing, but this whole thing about being this kind of creatures. I'm optimistic that eventually there'll be young people who are beyond the problems that we have.
Beautiful. 90%, 95% of people answer that younger people. So it is a hopeful thing. And it's interesting how I can repeat how the majority of people answer these questions, because I want people to just answer them in the full spectrum, all different answers. But when you find these patterns where certain people answer certain questions, I mean, most people answer certain questions a particular way, it seems, well, that's curious. Are we all equally brainwashed, or do we really believe the hope is in the youth?
I don't think the hope is in the old people. You know what I mean? So,
well, that woman, the Cuban painter, she just died. She was 106. Her career didn't take off till she was like 85.
wow.
I says, that is amazing.
Yeah, as you say, yeah. You're quite right.
We got to give a little credit to the elders.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Anyway, Richard,
here in Australia, when you think of the word old people, you're thinking, well, I first and foremost think about the Aboriginal people, who are the old people here, as in the people who used to be here, and they refer to the old people as their ancestors. Well, they refer to the ancestors as the old people, but I think also of their elders, and I guess every time you hear of an elder type person dying, you think of the loss of that intricate knowledge. I guess that it's hard to be optimistic about the old people in that respect. The only thing is that they are still there and they still carry stuff and can still pass it on.
Yeah. Well, I think you're doing that because aren't you partially archival, partially workshopping, teaching, and partially making new on your own? So you're integrating the whole package. You're not just a filmmaker, are you? Don't you run a sort of a whole?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we have a business here, which is it's a business, but it's also a service. Dealing with small format film.
Yeah.
I don't see it as particularly noble. I think that stuff that we do with community groups and with our collective in Melbourne, I think that's more noble. And the stuff that Diana and I do when we travel around and do workshops with people, I think that's good stuff. Yeah.
You're like for years I've wanted to do a workshop in Ann Arbor or any of these places called Power Couples in Experimental Film. So it's like Paulo and Lisa at Echo Park, Sure. Sabine I just interviewed, and Bill Brown. There's a whole, them all. A whole sort. But to get them all on stage,
wow.
and ask questions and see how it would break down, it would be fun.
Yes, there's a lot of questions that Diana and I get asked in Q&As, which are the same each time. Like, how do we collaborate? Who does what? People are very interested in that. And so, yes, I think it would be an interesting discussion to hear how these power couples you refer to.
Yeah, I want to do it. I mean, it's
a fun idea.
Yeah. Anyways, this was really fun, Richard. Thank you so much for your time. I hope our discussion never ends, and I'm going to hit the button to close
Good
out.
on you, Jerry. Yeah, thanks. I had a lot on today, and this has been a really good bit of therapy in calming me down. And you know, like these kind of discussions, you know, they're important because it forces you to actually do some work on your ideas. You know what I mean? Like I was sitting here, I was having to actually generate stuff, as opposed to just, you know, making toast and doing the dishes or whatever it might be. This was a productive 2 hours for me. So thank you.
I appreciate it. That's what I try to do with these. So thanks again.
Good on you. Okay, see you down the tree or down Arbor sometime.
Hope so. Bye.
Okay, ciao.